Mike Demergis here, along with author and sports marketer Stephen Costello, and great to have you in the studio here at Iona, first off. And I found the title of your book fascinating. My father never took me to a baseball game. It's kind of the opposite of kids always say, my father did take me to the baseball game, and they never forgot that first experience. First off, what was the genesis for writing this book? And certainly the title is something that catches people's attention.
Well, I think it's really important on the title, and I had a lot of help from another best-selling author, Jeffrey Gitomer, who I had gone to. He wrote the Little Red Book of Selling, went down to North Carolina, and he read through the book, and he's like, I think it's a case of, your father never took you to a baseball game, and he actually came up with that title. And he said with the title I had, originally I would have only probably sold 2 books. I'd have bought one, and my mother would have bought one. So, and the title too of the book is so important. And I think anything that you do in life is really a team game. And all the people who helped me with my book, it definitely wasn't alone. And I really wanted to talk about I wanted to tell like my story. I wanted to talk about growing up in the Bronx, growing up in a 2-bedroom apartment, and, really not having a supportive dad, a dad who was, violent, abusive, and, I dealt with a lot of different types of, whether it was physical abuse or verbal abuse. And, and as any kid, you deal with a lot of issues with confidence. And I think the one common denominator between anyone who deals with abuse is you back burner it. You never talk about it. You're not proud of it. You're not going to go out on a date and go, oh, hey, my dad did this and that to me yesterday. So it was something I compartmentalized for probably over 40 years. And it was finally my kids are like, Dad, just write the book. Just basically tell the story.
At what age did the abuse start? And did you have brothers and sisters that were abused? Your mother as well? I mean, at what age did the abuse start?
Well, it was a little bit different because, we were talking about Joe Torre earlier, not on camera, but, it just was at like a very young age, like almost as young as I could. I had 2 younger brothers.
And did you think this was just common, that everybody kind of dealt with this? Is just you growing up with something like this? You didn't think it was abnormal initially?
No, initially, and then finally, like we moved out to Long Island, and then you would go to other kids' houses, and the father would be cool, and they'd be having family dinner, and there wouldn't be the yelling and the screaming, and just the type of things that you're like, oh, this is. And I think the other thing is it kind of becomes like it snowballs, because since your father is abusive and odd and this and that, your friends pick up on that, and then they start to kind of pick on you and bully you and do different things.
So really there's a confidence issue going on as you're growing up, because your father's picking on you. You as a young man have a confidence issue as you're growing up.
There's a total confidence issue, and I think everyone has different levels of confidence issues and wanting to take risks, and what am I going to do, and what am I going to be. And I think currently I deal with a lot of what's called imposter syndrome. Like, how did I go from Van Nest Avenue, being a kid in the Bronx, to going away to college, to running a $1 billion company, to being on Fox News, to sitting here and having you interview me, and like there's a part of me that's going to get back in my car and like not believe that it was actually real. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of some of what you deal with too. And it's like, wow, how'd we get here?
So as a teen, you're going through this and the abuse in the house. What did you get lost in? What was your sanctuary per se? Because you have to have that as a kid.
That's a great question. And I had really 2 sanctuaries. It was kind of the thing where I remember my father had like a green Blazer, so maybe it was a 1972 Blazer. So say I was 11 years old, and like the Blazer would come in the driveway, and I would just cringe, and I'd just basically slip out the back door. I'd go down to my friend's house, whatever, tell my mom I'm going to Peter's or Jimmy's, or whatever, and then I would come back like when it was dark, and he'd be up at like 5 in the morning to go to work. He was a truck driver, and then when I came home, he'd be sleeping, and then I'd do my homework, and do whatever. But I actually brought this piece of paper because I remember this like really vividly, and I think this is probably one of the defining points of my life. Was my friends came over, and I'm sure everyone remembers 7th grade, and 7th grade is the first time you have organized sports. And we were all going out for the basketball team, like the 7th grade basketball team. We all had like an idea of how good we were in basketball. So we're sitting at my kitchen table, which was like one of those Formica tables. And so this piece of paper, my friends and I decided, that my friend Peter was definitely making the team because he was great in basketball. Mark was definitely making the team because he played summer league. Jimmy might make the team, and I definitely wasn't making the team. So I went to bed that night, and I'm sitting and I have this piece of paper, and I'm like, am I going to accept this? Am I going to continue to just accept whatever? And like right at the corner of our house was like a basketball hoop. And like from that day over, I walked around with a basketball. I dribbled a basketball. I brought a basketball to school. I sat at night till in the dark there was like a street lamp, and I shot and I shot and I shot. And I thought about it. I'm like, I'm really going to make this team. And if they're making it, I'm making it. And I don't know there with the kids in the audience and everyone here, if you ever walk down to the cut list, and there's this cut list at the end of the hall. And you don't know what you're going to do if you make it, and you don't know what if you don't make it, you know what I mean? So you're walking down, and this piece of paper is going to define your life, like the next step of your life. There's either a cross out of your name, and I just remember walking down the hall that day, and I was the only one that made the team.
That's incredible.
They all got cut.
Yeah.
And
you talk about that piece of paper you have there. You talk to great people with great accomplishments. They always say, write things down. Put something on your refrigerator. What's your goal? Where do you want to be in 6 months? Where do you want to be in a year? Where do you want to be in 2 years? And people that accomplish great things, write things down. And it's incredible that you wrote that down at such a, you're talking about that at such a young age, and you were able to overcome that. So you were writing down your goals in some way.
Incredible that you said that, because I'm with Emily in the car today, and Emily works with me, and she's like, well, we're going to talk, what are you talking about today? I'm like, one of the most important things is writing things down. And if you go around my house, there's a million notes. There's notes
not
here.
texting to everybody.
No, not texting.
Actually writing
stuff
yellow
down.
sticky pads.
And let me tell you, anywhere I've been, whether it was my college dorm room or there's been, because you forget stuff. You forget stuff. And like everyone here, like everyone here today, it should be like a pen and a pad. Like, where's your pen, where's your pad? You're going to learn something. And I'm 55 and I'm learning, like, and the amount of people that I'm learning from and being around, like, you're never too old to learn. I'm going to learn so much. I mean, I learned, I studied like so much stuff about Iona, just, the graduation rate and where everyone came from. And, you telling me it was a lot of kids from the Bronx who grew up like where I grew up. Mm-hmm. And, it's just fascinating. Like learning is fascinating no matter what age you are. You never stop learning.
You were talking about your father, and he was a truck driver, sleep early, woke up early. Couple of questions, because you had that fear. Was he a smoker? And if you smelled smoke, did you become scared? And did he wear a certain cologne? Did that maybe hit off your senses, like it kind of maybe repulsed you as you got over if you had someone else smelling that cologne, or if you smelled cigarettes, did that signal trouble in your mind?
The smoking thing, I have like such a smoking phobia. And it's, again, just the stuff you're hitting on. It's kind of like we're finishing each other's lines. But my mother smoked and my father smoked multiple packs of cigarettes a day. And I just could not deal with the smoking. I remember we were looking for houses in Long Island. I was like 7 years old from the Bronx, and we were driving till we drove to where the house was $15,000, which was like the end of the expressway. Because, the way it works, you go to Huntington and it was 40,000, and then you went to, someone said they lived in Bethpage and it's 30,000, and then when you go all the way out there, it's like 14,000. Okay, this is for
you're
us.
Almost in London, right?
You're almost whatever. And and the thing about it was, the car would be like literally, the whole car would just be like a smoke mobile. I remember having like the window open, and I had like my head out like a dog, like, ah. And and then you're like, roll up that window. I'm gonna reach back there and snap your neck or something. You're like, all right, what do I want to do? Do I want to die of asphyxiation, or do I want like my neck snapped? I don't know. So it just became like, let's just buy this house already and cut down on like these long trips. So yeah, smoking. Yeah, I remember my father smoking Camels, my mother smoking Kents. The whole house smelled like smoke. Everything was smoke. You smoked on airplanes. You smoked in movie theaters. I mean, you got to talk about like, growing up in the 60s. And, we also had, I mean, there's some diversity here at Iona. There's diversity in the room. Like when you're growing up in 1968 at Sachem High School, 98% of the kids were right. And my father, outside of all the other stuff, was a racist. I mean, every night at the dinner table, it was this person, that person. My one friend was Jewish. She's like, oh, I don't know if I want that Jewish kid coming over. I mean, forget all the rest of the kids. I mean, you could never have, God forbid, you could never have like, a black person, or a person or a Chinese person or whatever. It was just not, it just wasn't like that. And I knew it was wrong. I'm like, like what's up with that? And, that became, we've definitely come a long way since then.
Well, you've certainly come a long way, and you made the basketball team. And at what age did you realize that you weren't who your father said you were? That you were able to come out of that I guess that punching bag. He was using you as a punching bag, and you were able to step out of that and you to give yourself a chance, because you could have got a lot of different ways. You could maybe use drugs, alcohol, and stuff like that.
Well, I think the two things that boosted the confidence with me was being able to play sports. I was unhittable as a little leaguer. A little leaguer, I was, and I always dealt with my birthday being in September, so I was always a little younger than the other kids, but I was left-handed. And, in college, I hit like the mid-80s. I played, baseball in college, and I think when I was on the field...
Joe Madden could have used you last night.
Yeah, no question.
Because he didn't use Chapman too well.
Yeah, no question. So, baseball, I'm 10 years old on the baseball field, and people are cheering for me, and I'm striking somebody out, and it felt great. I'm like, wow, this is a great feeling. And then, I would write something, and I just knew, like, I think writing's a gift. I don't know if you're born with it. I don't know if, like, I definitely can't sing. I was in a musical, but I can't sing. I don't know if you're born with writing as a gift, but I always had the ability to write. So my teachers were always like, wow, that was unbelievable. This was great. This made me whatever. And I just saw, that I had writing. So I think when I went away to college, I got the interest. So now I go away to college, and I'm away from my father. I'm away from my family. Nobody's around. And I'm different. And all of a sudden people are interested in me because I'm from New York, and my accent and my this and my that. And I'm like, wow, I'm cooler than I thought I was.
What accent? You're from the Bronx, right?
Right. I'm from the Bronx, and they're asking me like if I'm from London, and like all this other stuff, and well, I go to dinner with them, and and I just kind of slowly, like, hey, you're important, like this is important. And then I joined a fraternity, and then I had all these fraternity brothers, and everyone was kind of blind to you're just fraternity brothers. And I'm still in touch with them all now, and they helped with my book and those things. So it's just kind of, like climbing a ladder. Like people say they use this thing, climbing the ladder to success. I had to climb the ladder of, getting out of this thing. Like what am I going to be? Like what am I going to do? And, you want to talk about financially, if I ever had, if my grandmother gave me $100, my father would my father would take it from me. Like, so I go to college, and, a lot of people who speak and this and that, I know everyone started with $11. That's not true, but...
Well, Donald Trump started with $1 million.
Yeah, correct. But, like anyone you hear speak, they're like, oh, I started with $11 and I walked uphill. Not necessarily, but I started with like $600 that I got from a graduation party that I had to squirrel away. And I went away to school for $600, and I never got another dime from anybody. I mean, my grandmother used to go to Arthur Avenue and send me, the pasta and the Genoa salami, and I wouldn't go nuts. They're like, oh, a package from your grandmother, and, we'd all, like, I'd make some Italian meal, and, that was it. But you want to talk about nothing. Like, I had days where I didn't have enough money to eat. I had days where, and actually, if you don't mind, if we have a second, I used to go to the supermarket, and there was this coconut cake. It was like a Sara Lee coconut cake, and it was like $1 back then. You're talking 1979. I think it was like 99 cents. So I would go with the dollar, and I'd eat like a third of the cake in the morning, and I'd eat a third of the cake in the afternoon, and I'd eat a third of the cake at night. And that was what I ate. I ate on like $1. I didn't have gas for my car, so I would basically go to school with somebody, and
well, you clearly climbed out of poverty. You've climbed out of abuse, and the irony of it all is, you touch on this book. You have a deep connection to Joe Torre, the former Yankee manager who won 4 World Series with the Yankees. Joe Torre has a foundation called Safe at Home, and he too grew up in an abusive family. And Joe outwardly spoke out about it, about growing up in a household where he was abused as well. Talk about your relationship with Joe and how you connected on that level.
Well, just knowing Joe for Joe just being a great guy and really a better manager. He managed with the Cardinals and the Mets and I think the Braves a little bit. And again, it's like, lighting a candle and doing something about it. And you talk about Pete with ALS and you talk about some of the other things is I think the thing about it is with Joe writing the book and Joe having the Safe at Home Foundation. I go to Joe's golf outing every year. It's up in Westchester. And Joe dealt with, his father was much differently than mine. But I think the thing about when you take the combination of abuse is there's no roadmap this person. I think with Joe was more with the mother and it got a little bit crazy and the father got extremely violent and things like that. But just to
which
see,
sometimes can maybe even be worse in some ways, because you as a young boy, you want to protect your mother, so you kind of feel like maybe you could protect yourself, but when it's happening to your mother, it's almost,
no question,
it might even be worse in some ways.
Absolutely. And Joe has used his star power and Joe is a great player and in the Hall of Fame now. And Joe isn't just putting his name on top of a foundation, Joe's in the middle of it. Mm-hmm. And Maury Gossfriend, who works with him, and going to the outing again this year. And I mean, they do. And they actually have the outing at Rob Manfred, who's the commissioner of baseball. Mm-hmm. He actually lends his golf club so that they could raise extra money and a lot of money. So it's just an incredible thing that Joe does. And, we'll always, unfortunately, be connected through sports and through that thing. So
a couple of the people mentioned in the book, My Father Never Took Me to a Baseball Game by Stephen Costello, author. And Hank Aaron is another person you talk about in this book, and certainly someone that played in the 50s and 60s. Racism at its worst as he was chasing down Babe Ruth's record, and through the years, Hank Aaron is nothing but dignity, and it was really incredible that he was able to perform under abusive threats by the American public at the time. Talk about your relationship with Hank Aaron.
No question. There's, when you deal with, say, hundreds of athletes, which I've been blessed and humbled, and there's certain athletes that you get an incredible connection with, or two. Coach Knight has become like a dad to me, and you think of Doc Gooden being a guy who's hey, let's go to dinner. Last week, Doc's do you want to go to dinner? Doc Gooden's calling you to go to dinner. I was a 25-year-old kid when the Mets won the World Series, and I'm watching it on TV. I don't know nobody from nothing, in a sense. And Hank Aaron, I actually interviewed for my book, because part of what I talk about in my book is an athlete who was with the Pittsburgh Pirates, Harvey Haddix, who threw a perfect game, but he lost. So the kind of essence of my book is life isn't perfect, but it's perfect at times. And I called Hank, and a couple of times I said, Hank, could I ask you about that game and talk to you about the book? And the first couple of times he's like, you know what, I'm going to be in town on such and such a day. Let's talk about the book. And the thing about it was, here's a game in 1959, May of 1959. Hank remembered the game. Here's a guy who played in thousands of games. He remembered the game like it was yesterday. So here I am sitting with Hank. First, I pushed my chair over, I knocked his coat down. So he's like, you knocked my coat on the ground. I'm like, all right. So I went and got his coat, brushed it off, whatever, So it started off with me knocking his coat off the ground. And then, he literally just went through the game and went through, just so many old stories with me, and just have that audience. You're talking about Hank Aaron, greatest home run hitter of all time. And he took the time, actually 2 different times we sat down for this book, which just was, was amazing.
Yeah, certainly a man of dignity. Another person you talked about in the book is Bobby Knight, and Bobby certainly an influence. We know the stories about Bobby and his tough coaching and everything. Maybe not politically correct in today's day and age, but he's definitely made men of his players. And talk about his way of coaching young men.
Well, I think with Coach Knight, and Coach Knight in many different ways has become like a dad to me. I've been to his house. He's been to my house. We've done so many things together, gone on vacation. And the thing about it was, Coach graduated in 33 years, graduated everyone but 2 players. His graduation rate is beyond, and to win 3 national championships, and then to really only have, of all the players he ever had, they went to like 2 All-Star games in the NBA when like North Carolina, they've sent like 50 people to All-Star games in the NBA. So I think, just the way that Coach has, and Coach just is loyal and caring and smart, and just so many things. And he's just been such a great influence. And again, the first time I saw Coach Knight was probably 1980. My fraternity brothers saying, you want to go on a road trip and watch IU play UK, and maybe I had whatever, like got a student ticket for $3, and I'm watching Coach Knight from the bleachers at Rupp Arena, to now talking to Coach almost every day. So I mean, it's really been outstanding.
That's incredible. Any final thoughts you'd like to discuss before we wrap things up here
Yeah,
on the book?
Before we wrap, I think one of the most important things was the book took me 3.5 years to write. And I think anyone who's thinking about writing a book, when I would normally wait for the family to go to bed, whatever, and then I would just start. And you go in the zone and you get all these memories back. So I remember, I guess it was about 2 years into the book, and my mom came out and she's like, oh, what are you writing about? I'm like, I said, well, I'm writing about my life. I'm writing about growing up in the Bronx. And I'm writing about all the crazy stuff with Dad. And she's like, shouldn't you be writing about Derek Jeter and Mariano Rivera and going to the ESPYs and all that exciting stuff you do? That's what people read about, want to read about, and now this is my mother. And I'm like, I don't know. I think I want to write about my life, and then I'm having dinner at a restaurant about a year and a half later, and a friend of mine calls me, actually a friend who introduced me to Emily, who I'm here with today, and he's like, your book's #1 on Amazon. And I go, #1 on Amazon? He goes, yeah. I go, well, what about Mariano and Jeter? Because their books came out around the same time. He goes, nah. He goes, you're ahead of them. You got the bestseller thing and all that and everything else. And I really didn't have, good internet service where I was. So excused myself, went outside, and I took a screenshot and I sent it to my mom, and I said, I guess more people wanted to read about me. And I think that was another one of those really big, moments where you see your book, and then you see Mariano, and then you see Derek, and then you see Lou Gehrig, and you're like, how do we figure this one out?
Well, I want to thank you for coming here to Iona College and meeting with our students here. Certainly a great conversation. And again, the name of the book